All right, friends. Here we are. We just had to take a quick break so we could have everything set up. We're going to be talking a little bit about Lyndon LaRouche. If you all remember, about a few months ago, we talked about this weird MAGA communism um, scenario, right? That's going on with a lot of, I don't know, YouTubers, and it's a weird online fringe thing, but it comes from this very strange, but a movement that has had real effect and has caused a lot of damage. This movement led by Lyndon LaRouche, who is no longer with us. We're going to bring on right now Donald Parkinson. Donald
Hey,
Parkinson wrote a great piece in Jacobin magazine called How Lyndon LaRouche Said Goodbye to Marxism and Hello to Crazy. You can also read Donald's work at Cosmonaut, which y'all should definitely be checking out if you haven't read it before. Donald, thank you so much for joining us on Left Reckoning this week.
no, thanks for having me. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. Actually, I drive my family nuts by going on and on about Lyndon LaRouche, and then like when I got this article published in Jacobin, they were like, "Oh, wait, so maybe there actually is like something to your strange obsession if Jacobin wants to hear about it." So, yeah.
Well, I mean, you've been vindicated. Your obsession has been vindicated in a way. It's a different subject, but I remember when our friend Bronco Marchetti, put out his book on Joe Biden during the 2020 primary when it looked like Joe Biden was completely dead. I remember talking to some friends behind the scenes and them saying like, "Oh, I feel bad for Bronco. He just published this book, and like, it looks like Joe Biden's done." And then, of course, Joe Biden becomes president.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
remember that. Yeah.
your obsession with Lyndon LaRouche, unfortunately, has also proven, to be, you've been forward looking, because for some reason, after he's gone, Lyndon LaRouche has had some sense of a resurgence. Could you tell people? I mean, we're going to be talking about his history and stuff, but like, if you're somebody who has no idea who Lyndon LaRouche is, could you give people a general sense of what he was and what he represented?
Yeah, well, I wrote about Lyndon LaRouche back in 2019, actually, when he died for Cosmonaut, because I've always found these kind of fringe cult-like figures to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lyndon LaRouche is especially interesting to me because he's someone who started out on the far left, on the new left, actually. And, he was, he was a Marxist. And I think if you read Lyndon LaRouche's early writings, there is no doubt at all that he was an actual Marxist, even though he will deny he would deny that later on and say that he was just doing deep cover entryism in the New Left. But he was a Trotskyist at first. He was in the U.S. Army and stationed in India, and during World War II, where he met with he met some Indian Marxists, and he came into conflict with them because he thought that they should have organized an immediate insurrection against the British,
Mm.
and he found himself in agreement with the Trotskyist movement. And so back in the United States, he becomes acquainted with the Socialist Workers Party, which was the main Trotskyist party at this time. And so he basically becomes a Trotskyist figure within the SWP. And he also becomes a management consultant for businesses, where he helps businesses develop automation technology and various kind of management technology, where he actually becomes somewhat of an expert on the inner world of all these big monopoly capitalists and the technology and kind of cybernetic ideas that are getting popular within these circles at the time. But he's also writing bulletins for the SWP, and kind of becomes a one-man faction, like within the group. He eventually kind of comes into conflict with them. There's as Trots do, no offense to any Trotskyist comrades, but they split. He ends up in some some split off from the SWP with Jerry Healy, who goes on to basically form a cult of his own that's infamous for sexual abuse.
Mm.
That's a whole other story. But eventually he finds himself that he is a party of one, and that he is just too original, I think, or too brilliant of a Marxist to really fit in any party. So he kind of develops a following in SDS at Columbia University.
Could you remind people what SDS is?
Yeah, Students for Democratic Society. It was the biggest youth movement in the United States to oppose the Vietnam War, and it was fighting, for democracy, free speech, and a kind of homegrown American socialism. When it starts out, and it becomes progressively more Marxist, and there's all these different Marxist factions fighting within SDS. There's the Progressive Labor Party, who are kind of like Maoists, but very focused on industrial organizing, like sending students into factories to do that kind of work. And then you have like the Revolutionary Youth Movement, who are more also Maoist, but more like into like Black nationalism. And you also have the weather people, the weathermen, who famously become an armed struggle group that bombs government buildings and stuff like that. But LaRouche, he wasn't really into a lot of this Maoist stuff. He wasn't really into a lot of that kind of stuff. His group is really in the Rosa Luxembourg, actually. So they're kind of like a weird, like post-Trotskyist, like they're very much like into the intellectual side of things. Like he very much recruits a lot of young students who are not necessarily going to go work in a factory, but like want to kind of have a professional career, but like still get to like be a Marxist intellectual. So instead of like sending his recruits into the factories, they go and like picket landlords and queens and stuff like that. And so he's developing his following around SDS. And one thing that's interesting is LaRouche, his first big conflict of the New Left is over the Ocean Hill-Brownsville strike, which was you had the American Federation of Teachers go on strike against a community control of schools initiative led by various Puerto Rican and Black groups. And so this is like, most of SDS was on the side of the community control initiative, but LaRouche's faction is like infamous for siding with the teachers union, which was like kind of considered a hate strike in a lot of ways at the time. There was a lot of racial animus that was going on there. And so, he kind of makes a name for himself as like this workerist, like, we're not going to like, we're against these this new left identity politics type stuff, which is a complicated issue. But he kind of you can kind of see the beginnings of this rightward lurch, like very much from the beginning. But basically what happens is he forms his own group, the National Caucus of Labor Committees, out of the collapse of SDS, which is his vanguard group. And they're very much they have this idea that they're a very tight-knit professional vanguard group that's going to like lead America to the revolution on a wave of mass strikes. They're very into this idea that capitalism is going to enter crisis mode. There's going to be like a total breakdown of the economy, and there's going to be mass strikes, and it's going to take a small disciplined group led by the most brilliant intellectual in America, Lynn Marcus. As he goes by the name Lynn Marcus at this time, but which is kind of apparently a reference to Lenin and Trotsky, something like that. So yeah, he's very much like he's kind of your stereotypical, like the stereotypical idea of like what a Leninist, like a vanguardist, like sectarian type is, I guess, would be like what we're looking at here. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what Lenin's actual ideas on organization were. I don't think that this is an accurate representation of that, but so
I mean, I think this is why LaRouche is like, and we're going to get to some of the contemporary stuff in a little bit, but this is why LaRouche is interesting, because again, like like the obsession with Rosa Luxembourg, like we're big fans of some of Rosa's work. We've covered a lot of the program, and like that's the thing about like LaRouche then, and then some of the people who might pick up the mantle later, is like they'll cling on to like like a real radical intellectual tradition, and hold it as if like they're the ones who are the only ones who sort of understand it, regardless of what weird avenues they're using it to justify. And I just think for a casual listener, I think this is one of the lessons to gather from LaRouche. It's not saying that like, oh, because LaRouche, was like a leftist, or like, like Lenin or Rosa, like, oh, that means those people, those theorists are bad.
Right,
more.
right.
It's like, this is a very, very clear example of how somebody can hold on to something and sort of be like, I am the vanguard, I am the intellectual leader, I'm the only one who understands these things correctly. Anyone who questions me is dangerous, is a revisionist, is a counter-revolutionary. And like, you see this, and it gets progressively worse over time.
Right, right. And that's partly why the name of my first article on LaRouche was LaRouche, a warning for us all. Because I think a lot of young Marxists today could see something of themselves in the followers of LaRouche, you know? Like,
Yeah.
there was something kind of intellectually stimulating there that, you know, a lot of people were probably attracted to for legitimate reasons. I think, you know, LaRouche wrote a whole book, Dialectical Economics, which is his take on Marxist political economy and philosophy, which is, you know, I checked it out, you know, from my university library years ago to, you know, to see what it was all about, because there was this guy Warren Goldner that I used to read a lot, who I don't know if you're familiar with him. He has a publication, Insurgent Notes. He's kind of a left communist type. But he was part of LaRouche's group back in the day, and he still recommends Dialectical Economics as like an intriguing Marxist text to this day. And, you know, I took a look at it. A lot of it honestly went above my head, because a lot of it's like about like German idealist philosophy, like, you know, which I'm kind of starting to finally like understand a little bit. But, you know, there's a very high intellectual level here, and it wasn't, you know, just total insanity. But, you know, the total insanity doesn't take long to begin with LaRouche.
No, I mean, I want to get back to sort of progression of the story, but I mean, another funny one is like David Horowitz, who people might know as like a real
Right, right.
right wing crank. You know, was a pretty legit Marxist for a while. And you can read some of his stuff, his theoretical works. I mean, LaRouche isn't alone, in at least in the American context of, you know, these kinds of like leftist intellectuals who just embrace some weird right wing stuff. But I mean, could you talk a little bit more about, like, okay, so, you know, we started to develop, like, LaRouche is able to develop, you know, this group of people around SDS, a name for himself. I mean, you know, bring us through the next few years after that.
Yeah, so, you know, you get, you know, there's this whole you know, the issue with the Ocean Hill-Brownsville neighborhood strike and all that. Then you kind of get into these weird campaigns of you know, going after, for example, the it's kind of a black nationalist poet guy, Amiri Baraka, that was popular around this time in Newark, and the LaRouchites would, you know, went on these campaigns against him, where they kind of, you know, had these very racially charged you know, epithets that were used. And they start kind of getting into this very conspiratorial mindset where, you know, all of their enemies are CIA or KGB, because they also kind of have this anti-Soviet aspect. You know, they think that the Soviet Union is also like kind of you know, just as much an enemy of the workers as, you know, the US government. And so, you know, you start getting into like, they actually have training camps by like 1971 where they're like training like militias and stuff. Apparently, I don't know that much about it, but you know, there was, you know, this kind of, you kind of start seeing the kind of culty aspects developing. And you know, there's this attempt to recruit black youth in the ghetto, actually, which is interesting, where they're like publishing all this stuff with like insane like racial stereotypes, but also like recruiting like young black people to like go after their like enemies and stuff. So, you know, that's actually another kind of thing you'll see when they get more anti-Semitic. They'll like, you know, they'll recruit Jews and then like use that as a cover for like spreading like the most like, you know, insane anti-Semitic rhetoric. But you get, you know, this kind of you know, you kind of see the beginnings of it, but it's really in like 1973 with Operation Mop Up where it really gets crazy. There's this rivalry with the CPUSA they have, where you know, there's this welfare rights organization that they start, and the CPUSA is against it. And, you know, there's confrontations between the two groups. Like, they go to CPUSA meetings and try to crash them, and CPUSA kicks them out and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of tension with the CPUSA, and, you know, LaRouche's whole thing is that the CPUSA is compromised, and it's, you know, it's you know, the CIA has infiltrated it, and so we need to wage a total war on the CPUSA. And so, they launched this thing called Operation Mop Up, where they, train their cadres to basically violently attack CPUSA members. And you can read all about this online. There's all kinds of stories about people getting beat up, and they'll storm meetings with nunchucks, and
yeah, and like pretty serious violence too, right? Not just like, oh, they're interrupting a speaker, like they're coming in and they're smacking people about.
Right. And so you kind of get this type of thinking where the rest of the left is actually the main enemy. Like, the real ruling class is actually kind of the left. Like, the existing far left are entirely co-opted by the ruling class, and we are the only true Marxists. And so by like attacking the CPUSA, these are legitimate targets, and so you get this is almost like a test of loyalty to LaRouche as well. It's like, people will stick around for some of the crazy stuff before this, but it's like, are you willing to like pick up like a baseball bat and like go beat up some like random CPUSA members for this group? And that's kind of a test of loyalty for a lot of people. And so,
it's wild. I came across this article from 1977 August. From Washington Post. It's called like When Left Goes Right. And I'll share it here. Or here's some sections from it. One of the most volatile and militant groups in the country, NCLC, that's the LaRouche group, has until recently preached that it was on the verge of leading America to socialist revolution and smashing the, quote, Rockefeller, Carter, CIA-controlled proto-fascist state.
Right.
In an abrupt switch last year, it began to mute the talk of revolution and said it must now push instead for a creation of an industrialist capitalist republic under a Whig government with a 19th century Hamiltonian banking system.
Right.
The socialist state will apparently come later. But this is the part, like when you say like they're literally beating people with bats, accusing them of being CIA and their association. So Lyndon H. LaRouche, NCLC's leader and 1976 presidential candidate, has hired as his personal security advisor Mitchell L. Werbel III, an Atlanta-based firearms manufacturer and fervent anti-communist who assisted Cuban strongman Fulgencio Batista until Fidel Castro's takeover in 1959. LaRouche claims he is an assassination target of the Maoist Baader-Meinhof organization in West Germany and needs protection.
Yeah, no, it's really crazy how you get this shift, because in after before Operation Mop Up and during it, the CIA is still the main enemy, and around the same time, this is when you get the brainwashing incidents. You have the famous Chris White affair, where they basically like create this whole situation where this member was supposedly brainwashed by the CIA, and the group had to like de-brainwash him, but really like the de-brainwashing is their own attempt at brainwashing. And I mean, I don't really think that brainwashing in the strong sense is totally real. Like I think you can put people under immense psychological pressure and break them down, but I don't think you can like reprogram them to like do whatever you want them to do. At least as far as I know, I haven't really seen evidence that that's possible. But you do have these like attempts, like LaRouche.
I mean, I'm sorry. Like when a group like this, it's like we gotta like unbrainwash you, like you're, the red flag.
It's there's sort of amount of group conditioning going on.
Yeah. It's really when you start getting into total cult territory. Here's when you have these de-brainwashing affairs, and it's always about shadowy intelligence operations, influencing things. And obviously intelligence operations do happen, they are real, I'm not denying that, but there is this this absolute unhinged irrational paranoia about it, and LaRouche is feeding off of that, because I mean, this is when COINTELPRO is going on. There obviously is real stuff happening, so there is a kind of paranoia that's legitimate that LaRouche can feed off at this time.
Well, as Alex Jones said about David Icke, he's a turd in the punch bowl with some of his theories that sort of occlude what people should be recognizing. Like, it's interesting how that works.
Yep. And it's interesting because with this whole Chris White affair, they went totally public with it and were going to newspapers and stuff saying like, oh, the CIA like brainwashed one of our members and we need to do something about it. Like, so it starts getting crazier and crazier, and you have the Operation Mop Up stuff going down, and then that's when like after that is when like you see this kind of like anti-Rockefeller coalition type thing going on, where it's like, well, now, you know, the real threat of fascism is that the Rockefellers and Carter and you know, the Democratic Party are trying to take out Nixon and to you know, establish this fascist dictatorship. And so they come up with this whole theory that, you know, the right can be divided into like two factions. There's like the establishment friendly right that are the enemy, and then there's the kind of far populist right that can be like allied with against this oncoming like fascist dictatorship of, you know, the Rockefellers. And so that's how you start, you know, they end up working with people like the Grand Dragon of the KKK, Robert Miles, you know, someone who was convicted for the crime of bombing school buses in protest of racial integration policies. So they're allying in these anti-busing coalitions with the KKK, for example. You have these, you know, you have people like Mitchell Werbel, as you mentioned. They start hooking up with him, and he's incredibly sus. Like, you know, he's, you know, he was like an arms dealer, basically. Like, he invented a silencer for a machine gun. He made a lot of money off of that. But he was also, he was involved in the Bay of Pigs, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Castro plots, he was like a point of contact.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, during this time, I will say during Operation Moppa, for example, like the CPUSA was accusing the LaRouche people of being CIA. But as far as we know, there's actually no evidence that they had any real contact with the CIA.
They're just doing it pro bono.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, exactly. They were just being like a crazy cult. And, you know, but they do start making connections with the CIA after this. And they kind of, you know, develop this whole strategy of we're going to, you know, kind of move towards the populist right. They started hooking up with a Willis Carto of the Liberty Lobby, who was like a famous Holocaust denier, for example. And, you know, he's a big influence on the modern far right as well. And so they start working together. And, you know, I think, you know, a lot of ways, you know, working with all these far right people kind of gave them an in with a lot of CIA people, because it was a way to kind of show, like, we're not, you know, the crazy, like, loony Marxists that we used to be. Like, you know, we're a different group now, you know. But really, until like 1976, I'd say they still do kind of portray themselves as a Marxist group. It's just that they're like, you know, trying to save America from deindustrialization, for example, through this kind of you know, we kind of have this theory that, like, you know, finance capital is like taking over, which is, you know, kind of true. Let's face it. Like, you know, there is some real changes in the economy going on at this point, and, you know, there is this, you know, this financialization going on. So they kind of come up with this idea that we need to like ally with like productive capitalism to promote growth and reindustrialization of America against finance capital, which is, you know, you see a lot of that kind of stuff in like fascist economics, honestly. But so they start, you know, moving in this direction, you know, and they start promoting fusion energy, which is interesting because it's, you know, like, oh, fusion energy, that's a good idea, you know. I think we
would love it.
Yeah, no, I'm pro fusion. I think, you know, we should be researching it. I think you know, it'd be great if we had people's fusion for socialism. So, you know, so he starts recruiting like scientists who are, you know, researching fusion energy and stuff through his like Fusion Energy Foundation. And later on, this gives him an in with the Reagan administration, because, you know, Reagan is looking for nuclear scientists to you know, develop stronger weapons against the Soviet Union. And so you know, this is a way for LaRouche to kind of build his connections with people who are basically in the CIA and the Reagan administration, were hardline Cold Warriors.
So like, correct me if I'm wrong, like the timeline, because like there's all this very serious stuff with LaRouche, but it's worth mentioning there's a lot of like really like not just like bizarre, but like very funny fixations that they have. One of them is he's very into Greek philosophy, and you might have to correct me if I'm wrong. Is it Plato's the bad one, Aristotle's the good one?
Right, right. Yeah, he has this he makes a total shift philosophically around like 1978.
Okay.
With this it's like The Secrets Known Only to the Inner Elites is kind of the pamphlet he writes to kind of announce this new like philosophical turn. But yeah, it's basically like history is like a battle between two conspiracies. There's a conspiracy of the oligarchy, which is Aristotle, and then there's the conspiracy of the humanists, which is Plato.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, he comes up with this whole narrative of history and this whole narrative of philosophy, which kind of, you know, it's very ingenious in a way because you can kind of arbitrarily change it to like, ally with whichever groups like happen to like accept you.
It'd be
at the
good in
moment.
like a fantasy novel. Do you know what I mean? Like if you created an alternate universe and you want to have like a crazy secret coalition that's actually behind most of history, like it'd be interesting, but like it's completely ludicrous as like as a theory of history.
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's that, and then you know, I was mentioned before we went live the singing thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
They're
not an
very
expert in
into
this, but there's like an old way of singing that they used to do in opera, and they stopped doing it in the 20th century. And LaRouche is like, we have to go back to this older style singing. I wish I had the only way I could explain it would be by trying to do it myself, and I'm not going to do that live.
Yeah, LaRouche, there's this whole thing about Verdi tuning that they promote, where like, you know, that the tuning was all changed by the Nazis and we have to return to Verdi tuning. And this, you know, they were very obsessed with classical music, you know, even from the beginning, like their kind of thing, they had this whole anti-counterculture kind of aesthetic, or it's like, so well, we're not like all these hippie new leftists, like we don't listen to Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones, we listen to Beethoven and Verdi, and you know, we're cultured, you know, they're very into this idea of like, you know, propagating like classical humanist culture, which, you know, I'm not trying to dunk on like that stuff at all. You know, I think that's obviously important as part of the treasures of humanity, but you know, they kind of have this classic conservative like fixation on that stuff, and this very hippie bashing anti-counterculture. Like they're big into the conspiracy that the Beatles were like a project of the Tavistock Institute and the Queen of England to like promote drug culture and promote the drug trade.
And so that's where the Queen comes into.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is like, you know, the Queen of England kind of does become like, you know, the center of this whole conspiracy.
He's not Irish, is he?
Oligarchy, you know, because like, as I mentioned before, LaRouche, you know, he gets started on his political journey with in India, where, you know, he witnesses the British occupation of India firsthand, you know, and so, you know, he is right that the British Empire is an evil and terrible institution, you know, but the British Empire doesn't control the world anymore. It's the U.S. Empire now. After World War II, it was, you know, the hegemon became the United States. So in a way, the whole British Empire fixation, in my opinion, is like a way for them to like kind of save America, because they can kind of like say that, like, you know, oh, really the problem is the British Empire, and the American Empire is really just like the British Empire's proxy. And it's really the Queen of England and you know, the City of London financiers that are controlling everything. And, you know, which isn't to say that the, you know, Britain doesn't still play an important role in imperialism today, but it's the American Empire is on top. And, you know, there is this kind of idealization of American past and the American system of economics. You know, there's this very strong American patriotism and terrible views on Native Americans. You can find some of their writings on this, you know, this whole, you know, very much this kind of idealization of America as a as an institution. And
which, as we're building up to, you know, is some part of some of these new variations of this. But I have to share.
So I just wanted to comment. Oh, go ahead, David.
This is really fast, and bring us back in on a serious thing. Our good friend Chip Gibbons was telling me, and I don't remember the timing of this, that the LaRouche people got a bunch of Italian opera singers to endorse returning to like tuning.
Yeah,
and they have no idea like what, you know, what this group is. So they were doing all these videos in, you know, in English, be like, we got to return to like the arts of the classics, and the LaRouche people are like, see, you know, the Italians are with us now too.
That is the funniest. That like we've been tuning the music wrong the whole time. That's such. It seems like such a classic cult thing of like, if this is a test, if you can orientate yourself to like basically agree that you've been hearing music wrong, then, you know, we got you. That's very funny.
You know, I mean, I think these kind of cult-like groups or ideologies, you know, they always have these kind of like tests. It's like, if you can get, and it's a way, you know, it kind of reminds me of QAnon. You know, it's like, it's a way of showing your loyalty to the movement. It's like, you know, if you believe in this crazy thing, like if I believe in the Hillary Clinton drinks the blood of babies or whatever. Like it's like a way of like I actually do believe this. This is like what I'm all about. It's like a way of like being like I'm part of this movement. Like I'm not afraid to like stand against the mainstream and say what I really think. And
yeah,
I'm not afraid that people are going to judge me as crazy for saying this. So it's like a way of showing your loyalty.
And then it reinforces community. Like I always get like people act surprised that there are flat earthers online. And to me, it's like, well, one, there are two answers to the question, flat or not flat. And if you pick the one that not very many other people are picking, you do get a community and a whole bunch of people that are like, you're right. And you actually have some key secret knowledge. Like it's not a surprise psychologically.
Yeah.
So can you bring us, because I want to get to some of this contemporary stuff too, and don't want to run out of time, but can you get us, through the 80s?
Right. So yeah, the 80s, is when LaRouche basically becomes Ronald Reagan's like, big, like, he becomes basically a cheerleader for the Reagan administration. He creates a lot of connections to people within the Reagan administration, and he basically, LaRouche actually he claims that he came up with the idea of the Strategic Defense Initiative or Star Wars, which is like, the idea we're going to build giant space lasers, and he had all these crazy fantasies of total war mobilization against the Soviet Union, and so he makes all these connections with the CIA, and he gets a lot of his people involved in pushing the Star Wars program. At the same time, they're running people in the Democratic Party, especially in around like Middle America and the Midwest, are kind of running as like kind of like populist, like Democrats, like we're gonna like kick the drug dealers out of town, and we're that was one of our big things was like going after drugs. We're going to put AIDS patients in camps, which was one of the actually something they campaigned on, and they actually got a referendum on it in California, which was thankfully defeated. But basically like running as like far right like Democrats, and they actually were able to win some elections. And I actually begin my Jacobin article kind of detailing that. So
yeah, in Chicago.
Yeah. So they create a big controversy in the Democratic Party in Chicago because they actually are having some mild, like, entryist success within the Democratic Party. And they're also running all these insane scam operations to finance the whole thing.
Yeah, I should have asked how they were financing themselves.
Yeah, like they're calling up old ladies and being like, we need all of your money to, like, to help Ronald Reagan, like, defeat the communists. Like, so please, like, hand over, like, your savings, and we'll make sure you're rewarded or whatever for your services to America. So they're just scamming all these people. There's all kinds of elaborate scam operations they're running, and basically at this point they've created what essentially is a private intelligence service, and it's global in reach. Like they have people in Sweden who were connected to the assassination of Olof Palme. They have people in Mexico. They have people all in West Germany. They have people all over the world at this point. Like, building this whole network that is essentially like a mix of Scientology and the CIA. Like, because you have this strange ideology, there's a lot of psychological type stuff going on. We can read LaRouche's house. LaRouche wrote all these writings, like one of them is called Beyond Psychoanalysis. It's all about like, the inner workings of the mind and how to master it. And so he's building this whole global network, really, and he's doing work for the CIA in South Africa. Even he had connections to the South African government, and so in a lot of ways, he's basically created this private intelligence agency. Is really what it is, and obviously there's a lot of funding required for this, and to fund it, there's all this scamming, all this fraud, and that's really what gets him in trouble with the law. And so eventually he does get convicted and sent to prison for his for all the financial fraud he's doing. And of course, this is presented as this attack of the deep state on a patriotic American who's trying to save the world from nuclear Armageddon while helping the Reagan administration build like laser beam weapons to microwave Soviet citizens. So, and it's funny if you talk to LaRouche people today and bring up the Star Wars stuff, they'll try to say that he was like playing both sides and actually was going to like help the Soviet Union get their own system so that there would be like peace or whatever. It's just convoluted story that makes no sense. But
it's the same reason that Trump was so close to Epstein, right? Because he was trying
right, yeah. And so LaRouche gets sent to prison for a while, and of course he does come back. And while he's in prison, it's kind of funny. They kind of have like a Catholic phase where like, but the thing is, they get like too into the Catholicism, so it threatens like LaRouche's own papal authority. So he has to like purge a bunch of people from his organization, and so LaRouche gets started back up in the 90s, and it's the 2000s. They get involved in the anti-Iraq war movement. And I know people who were recruited by them to canvass it because they thought they were just like, oh, I want to, I am against the Iraq war, so I'll do canvassing for this group that seems to be doing something about it, and then they find out what's really going on, like, oh, yeah, stay away.
Yeah.
And there is the case of Jeremiah Dugan, someone who was recruited on these grounds to the LaRouche movement who mysteriously died. That's a whole rabbit hole if you want to look into that. So yeah, they basically become this their big focuses, is anti-war. They famously portray Obama as Hitler at rallies, and they're also very anti-environmentalist is a big thing. There's this whole conspiracy of the green fascism, where and it is true that you did have like the Club of Rome people. There were like kind of like talks about overpopulation amongst like some of these like ruling class circles in the 70s and 80s that they kind of can point to as examples that there's this big Malthusian conspiracy to depopulate the planet. And he's hanging out with Alex Jones in the 2000s. There's a I was looking around for LaRouche stuff, and there was a bunch of appearances of him on the Alex Jones show back in the day, and so they're growing as a movement. Well, not really growing as a movement. They're still going on as a movement and recruiting people. And 2019, eventually LaRouche dies, and before he dies, there's the Trump phenomena happens. And at first, they're very distrustful of Trump. They think Trump is part of the conspiracy. He's part of the British family banking conspiracy or whatever. But then like they decide that Trump is actually on their side, and they promote Donald Trump. And this is where things get very strange, because if you look at what LaRouche is doing today, like the big things are like, well, of course, still the anti-environmentalism stuff, defeat green fascism was like the name of their big conference fairly recently. I think it was back in October when they had that. And they're also, they're still portraying themselves as an anti-war group.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry.
Well, I don't want to speculate too much, but I do imagine like that, they do probably have some connections with Russian intelligence, because that's what these people do, is they build connections with intelligence groups, and they'll work with whoever will kind of accept them. And I don't want to like spread like paranoia about Russia. I don't want to like feed into that stuff, but they probably are. There probably is something. I mean, just think about it, But
I also want to make a point on that. Like, to me, it's not a surprise that they're more prominent in this conflict than the Iraq War. Because the Iraq War was much easier for liberal left to, even though the Democratic Party was complicit in the Iraq War, Bush was in the driver's seat. It was Republicans driving, so you could imagine you're more in opposition. Whereas it's more of a complicated situation for a number of factors. So to me, it's not a surprise that they're making more hay in an anti-war environment, because there is mixed signals about this conflict compared to Iraq.
Right. I mean, I'll just leave all my cards out on the table. Like, I'm very much like against arming Ukraine, and I'm very much against NATO. And I think that the left has really screwed up in a lot of cases on this, and that we've and so I think AOC and the Squad have honestly, in my opinion, like sold out to social imperialism, and for their failure to have like a clear stance on this. And I understand Russia is a very unpleasant country. It's no one really wants to support Russia who's like progressive minded. I understand the complexity, but I think that if you really look at the facts, this is very much a conflict driven by U.S. imperialism and its desire to maintain hegemony. Yeah. And so, I think that what the LaRouche people are able to do is they're able to play on the weakness of the liberal left on this issue and portray themselves as a genuine opposition. Which is a dangerous situation because it creates a gap that allows a lot of confused people to kind of fall into the orbit of this group.
So I want to get back to that in just a second because we have some clips that you sent us, and I think these are really important. Which is like one of the reasons why I think, like, apart from just like this being interesting history, like why I think it's actually worthwhile to like cover and talk about today is some of these recent interventions. But before we talk about like what is going on right now and play some of these clips that you sent us, like 2019, you've been, following this for a while. LaRouche passes away. Did you have a sense that, or a feeling that this was going to sort of fizzle out and disappear? Were you surprised to see it sort of come up again, right? Because it seems like, one thing about cults, particularly like cults around the genius, figure like LaRouche, who's synthesizing Western philosophy, classical music, Marxism, and whatever the fuck else he's putting in there, right? I mean, like, were you surprised at it being able to maintain itself? Did you think in 2019, that some of these things would go away, or did you have a suspicion that it would outlast even him?
I honestly did not know what to expect. I was surprised that LaRouche kind of had a comeback. I honestly and
would you call it a comeback too?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, didn't go away. Like I had ran into them in my own hometown. Campaigning for Trump, even though it's kind of complicated because after LaRouche died, the LaRouche PAC and became their own thing, and then the Schiller Institute, which is Helga Zepp LaRouche, which probably does honestly have the authentic like title of the continuation of LaRouche, but and they're not as pro-Trump as the other split, but they're both vaguely pro-Trump. But the Schiller Institute people will criticize Trump for like being hard on China because one of their big things is like we need to like work with China to like
build the land bridge,
do the Belt and Road Initiative, which is interesting, But so they will critique Trump, but ultimately they still are like we need to like support the MAGA movement and stuff like that. But yeah, like I had run into the LaRouche PAC people campaigning for Trump and stuff. But it was always just like three people who honestly knew less about the actual history of LaRouche than I did when I would talk to them, which is funny. But yeah, I didn't, I thought it would just kind of stay as a kind of weird, irrelevant cult. But they've kind of been, making a name for themselves. And I have people like sending me these clips, like, oh man, look at these guys like calling out AOC, and it's like, well. Should tell you a little bit about who these people are,
So yeah, so let's play these and talk about it a little bit, because I think it's really important. And like, I don't know how many times we have to say what we think about this conflict, Matt, because it seems like we're just perpetually going to be called shit lips, no matter how much flack we get for saying that we don't think the U.S. should be arming Ukraine and we think that NATO expansion is bad. But whatever, that's personal gripe. The thing is, as I think both of y'all were saying earlier, like, like they do have like this path is open to them because of the kind of incomprehensible, incoherent general left position. And I'm including like a broad left here to like social liberals, to like socialists, and even some Marxists. And these clips, we've played them when they've come out. I'll call him out by name just because, he's leading these things and pushing it. Jose Vega, has gotten a lot of attention. I mean, these have had tremendous amounts of views every time he's put out these videos where they've basically shown up at AOC rallies or at rallies of other members of the squad. And we'll play this one, just a couple minutes from it, and talk about it a little bit, because, the thing that whenever these videos come out, basically, as I'm sure you deal with, Donald, like they come out and then you get all these people. It's like, well, I might not agree with them, but you got to hand it to them. And, my personal opinion is like, I don't think you need to like be handing it to the LaRouche cult. Instead of, you should be supporting like the lots of voices that are on the left who get a lot of flack for holding these positions instead of supporting cult members. But anyway,
it's funny to add Tulsi on there too.
Yes, that's an important point.
Literal military intelligence operative.
Who literally, if I recall correctly, when this video came out, Tulsi was in Africa, you know, doing special ops training with U.S. military in Africa, right? So like anti-imperialist Tulsi's like literally active mission at this point, you know, being brought up again shows that like, you know, like you could say something about criticizing these members, you know, for some of their positions, but you know, you know, your bullshit detector should start ringing when they start saying, yeah, Tulsi Gabbard. But anyways, let's play a couple minutes of this for folks.
Congresswoman, none of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard, she's left the Democratic Party because they're a bunch of war hawks, okay? You originally voted, you ran as an outsider, yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine. You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China. Why are you playing with the lives of American citizens? You're playing with our lives.
There will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. You voted to mobilize and send money to Ukrainian Nazis. You're a coward. You're a progressive socialist. Where are you against the war mobilization? He's telling the right truth. You have done nothing. Tulsi Gabbard has shown guts where you've shown cowardice. I believed in you, and you became the very thing you sought to fight against. That's what you've become. You are the establishment, and you are the reason why everybody will end up in a nuclear war unless you choose to stand up right now and denounce the Democratic Party. Will you do that?
Okay, and just before I throw to y'all, I want to note that this isn't us when we're talking about like the LaRouche angle here, us sort of reading in between the lines. Jose Vega, the person who's posting this, think like Beethoven, exonerate LaRouche.
Yeah, and Diane Sayre for Senate, who was their candidate for against Chuck Schumer, they were campaigning for.
And there's also a link here to go to the Schiller Institute, which, as you were saying, again, is a LaRouche organization. Yeah, I mean, so when you see something like this, I mean, again, like these went for for like protest actions, I gotta say too. Very rarely do these seem to sort of blow up in big ways. So the ones that I've maybe participated in the past, these ones went massive. They really exploded. And I'm just curious, Donald, to hear your sort of thoughts on this modern iteration and like the kind of argument that like I've even seen some people in the chat saying something similar to this. It's like these are the only people who are willing to stand up and say these things, so we should give them some credit.
Right. I mean, it's we live in very politically confusing times. Like this is something I've been saying like quite a bit. It's like, after the Bernie movement failed, the left has really been without direction. We don't know whether we should be tailing Joe Biden or if we should be, doing something else. And if we should be doing something else, what is that thing? And, you have this kind of rise of these culture wars with the Republican Party and playing on a lot of the confusion in the left at times. Actually, you have, things like, you have this kind of people like Compact Magazine and the MAGA communists who are trying to kind of like do this left-right synthesis and, kind of play on a lot of the confusion at the times. And I think the LaRouche stuff going on here is very much a part of that. Like I said earlier, like it's, they're very much taking advantage of the weakness of the left on the whole question of world war, of not just with Russia, but with, I think there's a lot of tensions rising with China right now. And honestly, like, I honestly think there will be war with China at some point. And I think that, I'm very concerned about that. And, I think the left really does need to get its act together on anti-imperialism without just kind of becoming like, I don't think we should become like, Putin simps or, and I don't think we shouldn't go that direction. I don't think we should become like Duginists or whatever. But like, I think we do need to, take a clear stance of, around, opposing the U.S. empire's intervention around the world. And so, I can understand why people would see these clips and be like, well, at least someone is speaking out, And I will say, like, I do think the U.S. state is a bigger enemy than the LaRouche cranks.
Yeah, I think
like I do think that we shouldn't overstate, the problem, but it is a problem, and I think that they are taking advantage of the left's weakness, and I think all we can really do is hold stronger to our principles and expose these people for who they are, because I don't think these people are actually anti-war. They're just opportunists. They're just trying to latch on to whatever cause will help them build connections with intelligence ties around the world, basically. If you read LaRouche, he has this whole article, basically, if you read between the lines, he's basically calling for using chemical and nuclear weapons around the world to launch this insane global crusade that would make any neocon blush. These people aren't anti-war. They aren't principally anti-war. They, if anything, they probably think that they probably want Putin to intensify his war effort. They don't actually want peace.
A lot of the associated people effectively say things to that level.
Yeah. I mean, they'll talk about how they just want peace and blah blah blah. But I mean, I think that their actual agenda is a kind of takeover of the U.S. government and a mobilization of the war machine against everyone they see as their enemy. So I don't think they're ever going to actually do that. I think the people who are in control of the war machine right now are the bigger problem. But people should know that these are not principled anti-war leftists, or even anti-war libertarians. I think you could probably trust more than these people, And
right, because
sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I hear about from plenty of people you're too easy on the squad for imperial reasons, and the people who I'm impressed by making those points also aren't impressed by Tulsi Gabbard or plugging her every couple of sentences in a protest speech. That is cult behavior, because to not be critical of that, it's very off.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, it speaks to the confusion of our times. That it seems like the only people who are speaking out are people like Tulsi Gabbard and Trump. So I think it really shows the importance of being critical, just maintaining critical thinking and not tailing whoever agrees with you on one thing. I think there was that big Rage Against the War Machine rally that was it was organized by the Libertarian Party and the People's Party, Nick Barana's thing, which is increasingly, I think, just a LaRouche front. And
that's the thing that's interesting. I'm curious what your thoughts on it, because there's a few big YouTubers and things like that have been pushing it. Hinkle, right, man?
Yeah, Jackson Hinkle, his whole ideology.
Jesus Christ, I always feel bad. I always get him mixed up with the degrowther. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The association there. Yeah. Hinkle, and then the other guy, Haas.
Yeah, Haas Al-Din, as they call him. I've actually debated him a few times.
Oh, have you really?
I've actually known him for years.
He was a Rev Left guy, right?
Yeah, he was on the Rev Left forum for a while.
He's the most interesting out of them, in my opinion, but I'll leave that.
He is interesting. I will give him that. I mean, he's a raging reactionary. This stuff lately has just been disgusting. He's just a raging misogynist, just red pill type stuff, and just anti-LGBT stuff. He actually is red brown. It's
and this bizarre attack on Starbucks workers.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a dog whistle for women out of the workplace. Really.
I think so.
Whenever they make fun of Starbucks workers, they always do this effeminate voice and
yeah.
Starbucks is 70% women as their workforce, and so it seems obvious to me that that's just a dog whistle for get women back in the kitchen.
Yeah, I saw one. I've only seen one thing of his. There's a debate with that. I forget what his name is. The communist sort of econ professor guy.
Oh, Richard Wolff, right?
No, it wasn't Richard Wolff. It was the other guy. I wish I could.
Richard Wolff went on that. That's rough.
I don't know. It was Asatar Bear, I think, maybe.
Asatar, yeah.
The pro-Stalin professor. He kind of got famous online for defending Stalin.
Was that it? Yeah. So I saw this debate, and it was Haas being wanting to make hating countercultural people the crux of a political campaign movement.
Right, right.
It's what I don't know what we're talking about right now.
I mean, that's just classic LaRouche.
Right.
I mean, they the whole hippie bashing thing, hating anything that's kind of counterculture and trying to kind of be square, traditional America is actually where it's at. So if you want to be a communist, you gotta you know, put on your suit and stop smoking pot, you know, and you know, that kind of
I mean, that's that's the thing that's interesting about hearing you give the telling of LaRouche, is that you can see that like these things that, like, I mean, I'm sorry, MAGA communism is just, it's just goofy on his face.
yeah.
You know, but you know, the idea is not even new, right? It's not even new to like the LaRouche. It's like classic, just dumb guy idea generally. But you could see like LaRouche has been setting up the foundation for this forever, right? And it's not some new synthesis. It's literally just like, let's just do it in 2022, 2023.
They ran it back. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's super. I mean, I'll be curious to see, you know, how long this holds up. I feel like some of those people have sort of played their bits a bit. I don't think this is going to go away, don't get me wrong, but I do think it had like a moment, and you know, I think it's a really important lesson. And like, I'd be curious, before we let you go, I mean, you know, one of the things that you said about the obituary that you wrote for LaRouche, and you can see it in this piece as well, is like there's something about this that there's a little bit of a warning for people on the left, you know, and what kinds of advice or lessons you think people should draw from this chapter?
Well, you know, I think like when LaRouche was a Marxist, I think he had like the totally wrong idea about like how revolution would come about. You know, I think his whole idea was, you know, you have your small group of, you know, people, and, you know, they're the vanguard and they have the right ideas, and there's going to be like a crisis, an economic crisis, and there's going to be mass strikes, and then your small group is going to kind of like intervene and lead everyone to socialism. And I mean, these ideas go all the way back to Mikhail Bakunin. You know, this was kind of his idea of how revolution would happen, versus Marx, which was like, we need to actually engage in mass politics and build a mass party of the working class. You know, we need to be for a revolution, have a revolutionary platform, but we're going to engage in mainstream politics. We're going to run candidates. We're going to work in the union movement. We're going to patiently build up the forces of the workers' movement, and, you know, bring a Marxist political program to the workers' movement. And we're going to build up the forces of the movement so that when a crisis does happen, or something like that does happen, we have a center of power that can pose an alternative to the capitalist state. You know? And so LaRouche, in my opinion, like, he never really understood the real Marxist strategy of revolution. I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of reasons why this strategy has kind of been forgotten. I think, you know, you have the Comintern, in my opinion, kind of wavered between this correct strategy and a more kind of ultra-left Bakuninist strategy of what I was mentioning before. And so I think that kind of dynamic, when you have that kind of strategy of like your small vanguard is going to, like, you know, intervene in the spontaneous movement, you kind of, you start making like, it kind of leads to a dynamic of sectarianism, that, you know, you need to protect the sanctity of your sectarian group. And it kind of can lead to cult dynamics, I think. And, you know, I think without any real strategy to actually build up the movement in mass politics, you start looking for other kind of shortcuts to power, other ways of, you know, especially when you have this idea that you need to do something now because the world is going to end if we don't, like, intervene. So you start, like, being like, oh, well, maybe we should, like, work with Mitchell Werbel III and the Grand Dragon of the KKK to stop the Rockefeller family, and maybe we should be, you know, making
stop the fascists.
The CIA. You know, because, you know, the situation is just so dire that we need to do whatever we can to get our small group to have influence. And, you know, so obviously the mass strike wave, you know, the rapture never happens, and so you start looking to, you know, other ways of, you know, getting your little sect into power. And so I think, you know, you can kind of, you know, look at the history of LaRouche as an example of a failure of a far left strategy that I think much of the far left today still kind of clings to. So, you know, and so there's that, but there's also just, you know, the warning about, you know, about just being like too ideologically dogmatic and purist. I think there's something to be said about that. This, you know, the idea of like kind of like, you know, thinking that one brilliant theorist, you know, is going to, like, has all the ideas to fix the world. And so, you know, whatever we need to do, whatever we can.
It is a very idealist, you know, I mean, it's super goofy, but it's so idealist, right? If we, you know, if Aristotle wins and Beethoven wins, then, you know, we're good.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a warning just about how, you know, through the dynamics of political failure, small left groups can fall into the far right. And I think it's you see the kind of temptation of the right today. You have a lot of people, like, the right has money, let's face it. So it makes sense to write for compact magazines or kind of hanging around those circles, because they'll pay you better than Jacobin will pay you, which so the right does court the left. The right does try. They love disaffected leftists. Those are the most useful propagandists. So I do think like we can't overstate the threat, and in the name of and end up kind of sanctifying liberalism and the kind of progressive liberalism that's is still like hegemonic. I'd say we have to be weary of the pull that the right can have, and their courting of Marxists, and we need to resist that. We need to be principled, and we need to stick true to the straightforward path of solid Marxism. I think Cosmonaut is we're trying to create a space for Marxism, a real Marxism, to have these debates about political strategy, about theory. We have a lot of people who work in DSA and in the Marxist Unity group, which I'm a part of. So I think I think it's just a question of you have to maintain your principles, maintain a solid Marxist background, but not fall into the sectarian mindset that you have all the answers and that everyone else is the enemy who needs to be destroyed because they're CIA or they're whatever.
Yes, which is a great weapon, because even if it's not true, it can cause a lot of damage, right? Like the idea of everyone else is FBI, CIA, then you're just
right. Like we need to be able to treat political differences in the left as serious, that we need to be able to debate them out, but we also need to be able to not make each other into Schmittian enemies where the conflict is so existential that they need to be destroyed or whatever. I have my disagreements with the CPUSA. But I'm not going to tell my my comrades to go attack them with baseball bats.
Yeah,
I'm
not going to Dick's Sporting Goods. Yeah.
I'm going to engage their members in respectful debate. I'm going to be clear about my differences with them. I'm going to be, I'm not going to hide differences in the name of unity. But I still I'm going to engage with the left in good faith, because I think that really is I still ultimately think that we can't just start a new sectarian group because most of the left sucks. We need to actually engage the existing left and win them over to a solid Marxist program. And so that's why I'm in DSA, and that's why I work with a lot of people who I will probably see me as too extreme or whatever, or I see them as too reformist. But I think that we got to do mass politics, and we have to be told about it, but we have to nonetheless, be able to actually do mass politics.
That's a more people trusting approach than the conspiracy minded. They're all secretly CIA. Meanwhile, we're partnering with arms dealers.
Right.
Well, Donald, I really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight. We'll have to do it again soon. People should read the piece in the new print edition of Jacobin, how Lyndon LaRouche said goodbye to Marxism and hello to crazy. Before you go, you mentioned it before, but could you give people a sense of what Cosmonaut is and let them know where they can go to check it out?
Yeah, go to cosmonautmag.com. We have been operating since 2018. Me and a group of friends, that just been talking for a while online, and and I knew in person as well. And I had a group in Tampa for a while, and we had just been saying I think we should start a publication, a kind of Marxist think tank almost we have a perspective on what is correct for the US left, but we're going to engage in dialogue and publish people that we disagree with. For example, we're going to have a kind of pluralistic and open publication that will give a space for the the actual Marxist left to engage in these debates and hash these things out. So we usually have 2 articles in a podcast every week. Sometimes, it doesn't always work out because it's an all volunteer operation, but, we do make sure to have a steady stream of content, and we have a lot of letters to the editor. A lot of people write letters to us, and that's kind of so we don't have comments on our articles. Instead, we have letters because, you know, I think comment sections, people just shoot the shit. They don't really think about what they're going to say. But I find having a letter section means you have to actually sit down and think about what you're going to say. And so we have a lot of you know, a lot of back and forth in the letter section. We have articles and people writing responses to each other, and you know, we do have like a general kind of editorial line and perspective. But as I said, you know, we publish different perspectives and we engage in respectful debate. You know, you can support us on Patreon. We also print books. We have some stuff in the works. We have a book on the history of the gay movement, actually, in the U.S. That's in the works. It's kind of a, you know, a critical investigation of you know, it goes into the relation of Marxism and gay politics. And we have you know, we have a few other books. We have we did a reprint of Bukharin's Historical Materialism, which is a kind of a classic Bolshevik text. So we're working on that. You know, the print stuff is a bit slower because it's like I said, it's an all volunteer operation for the most part. You know, I don't make a cent from it, so you know. But
no, people should read it and support. I always get a lot out of it. I do appreciate all the work that y'all do there, and you know, thank you so much for it. Donald, appreciate you coming on the show so much. We'll have to do it again soon, folks. There'll be links below for you to follow Donald's work. Thanks again, friend.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. I had a really good time talking about all this.
Hell yeah, man.
Thank you, Donald.
Talk to you soon.
All right.